Assalamu alaikum dear students. Welcome to a new video of mine with a new lecture on a new topic related to William Shakespeare. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss William Shakespeare, especially Shakespearean comedy. What are the chief characteristics of Shakespearean comedy? This is what we are going to discuss today. Before discussing the chief characteristics of Shakespearean comedy, we must have an introduction to this topic, right? As you know that William Shakespeare is a great comedy writer. When he started writing comedies, then some of the critics came up with the view that William Shakespeare has a comic genius and he is naturally born to write comedies because he produced great comedies, successful comedies in the history of English drama. For example, he produced comedies like As You Like It, Love's Labour's Lost, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Merchant of Venice, etc., etc., etc. List is long, right? Before discussing the main characteristics of chief features of Shakespearean comedy, let's have a comparison and contrast between a romantic comedy and a classical comedy. In the times of William Shakespeare, there were two types of comedies that were being written. One was the romantic comedy and the other was the classical comedy. Romantic comedy was being written by William Shakespeare himself, and on the other hand, classical comedy was being written by Ben Jonson, the contemporary of William Shakespeare. There are three main differences between these two types of comedies of the times of William Shakespeare. First important difference between these two types of comedies is that of realism. Romantic comedy is not at all realistic, whereas on the other hand, classical comedy of Ben Jonson is highly realistic. Everything in the classical comedy of Ben Jonson is highly realistic in nature. The themes, the settings, the characters in the classical comedies of Ben Jonson are highly realistic, whereas on the other hand, there is no such realism, at least conventional realism, in the romantic comedies of William Shakespeare. So this is the first important characteristic of, or the difference between, the classical comedy on the one hand and romantic comedy on the other. Next important difference between the classical comedy and the romantic comedy is that of didacticism or morality. Classical comedy is highly moralistic. It always preaches a kind of morality to the reader. It always inculcates some moral principles in the minds and the hearts of the audience and the readers. Whereas there is no such didacticism or morality in the romantic comedies of William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare does not preach any kind of morality to his readers, to his audience through his comedies. So William Shakespeare's romantic comedies are not at all based upon didacticism or morality. He simply holds mirror to life in his comedies. He simply presents life as it is in the world of his comedies. So this is the second important difference between the classical comedy on the one hand and the romantic comedy on the other. Third last important major difference between these two types of comedies is observance of classical rules. Romantic comedy does not observe classical rules like separation of species, three unities, and use of messenger. Whereas on the other hand, the classical comedy of Ben Jonson strictly observes these three rules of the classical comedy. Ben Jonson's comedies are strictly based upon these rules of separation of species, three unities, and the use of messenger. Separation of species means that the species of drama, the kind of drama, right? The kind of drama, species means the kind of drama. And there are two species of drama, two kinds of drama, two major kinds of drama. One is comedy and the other is tragedy. Separation of species, this law, this classical rule says that when a dramatist writes a comedy, then his comedy should purely be comedy. And when he writes tragedy, then his tragedy should purely be tragedy. Both should not be mixed into each other. Tragedy should not have elements of comedy into it, and comedy should not have elements of tragedy into it. Both the species should be kept separate. This is the meaning of separation of species. And three unities: unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. These rules are observed by the classical comedy, and these rules are not at all observed by the romantic comedies of William Shakespeare. And last but not the least classical rule is use of messenger. In classical comedy, a messenger is used, a narrator is used. There is more of narration in classical comedy than actual action on the stage. Whereas in the romantic comedies of William Shakespeare, there is more of action on the stage than the narration on the stage. Action is actually performed on the stage in romantic comedy, and there is little of narration of the story by a messenger or a narrator who comes up on the stage and narrates a story before the audience. So these are the classical rules that are not at all observed by the romantic comedies of William Shakespeare, and that are tightly observed by the classical comedies of Ben Jonson. So these are the three main differences that lie between the classical comedy and the romantic comedy. So this is the introduction to the topic Shakespearean comedy. Now let's discuss the main characteristics of Shakespearean comedy. First and the foremost characteristic of Shakespearean comedy is romantic world, or depiction of romantic world. Shakespearean comedy always depicts a world that is romantic in nature. In other words, Shakespearean comedy is always based upon an imaginary world that is 100 times removed from real life. Everything in this world is unrealistic, imaginary, fantastic in nature. For example, the characters in this world are fantastic and imaginary in nature. The settings and places are fantastic and imaginary in nature. For example, take the examples of the settings. All the settings that are there in the comedies of William Shakespeare, they are purely and surely romantic in nature, imaginary in nature. They are not taken from the real world, right? They are not taken from the real world. They are created by the imagination of William Shakespeare. For example, there are settings and places like Illyria, Thebes, Venus or Venice, right? And there are and Forest of Arden in the comedy As You Like It, right? Forest of Arden is a setting depicted by William Shakespeare in his comedy As You Like It. It's a romantic setting. And then next is Illyria. Illyria is the setting in the comedy Twelfth Night, right? Venus or Venice is the setting in the Merchant of Venice, right? So all these settings that are depicted by William Shakespeare in his great and different comedies, they are all imaginary, they are all fantastic, and they are not real places like New York and London and Lahore and Karachi and such like places, right? They are purely from the imagination of William Shakespeare, right? So this is the example of imaginary settings created by William Shakespeare in his romantic world that he depicts, presents in the world of his comedies. Next, characters are also romantic, imaginary in nature. They are removed from real human being. They are totally different from real human beings, right? The characters that are there in the comedies of William Shakespeare, they do not live a life of an ordinary person. They live a life of an imaginary human beings, fantastic human being. They have a dreamlike life. Their life is like a never-ending spring, right? Their life is like bed of roses. They never see any thorns in their life. Their life is never thorns of, you can say a bed of thorns. It is always bed of roses. Their life is beautiful. There is sunshine of happiness. There is a rainbow of joy in their life. There is no darkness of sorrow. There is no, dark clouds of gloominess or pessimism in their life. They lead a happy life and they lead a financially prosperous life. How they lead a prosperous life, William Shakespeare never depicts that. William Shakespeare never portrays them going to the offices, performing their duties, going through financial worries or things like that. They are, they lead a happy life and their life is like a never-ending spring. And it seems that a sort of a manna falls upon them. So they lead a very happy and prosperous life. So this life is not, close to real life. We do not live this sort of a life in real life. Real human beings do not have, happy life all the times. Their life is the mixture of good and bad moments. For an ordinary man, life's like a seesaw. One day up and the next day down and the next day up again. So this is how ordinary man lives. Shakespeare's characters do not live this sort of a life, which is why Shakespearean characters in his romantic comedies are fantastic in nature, imaginary in nature, romantic in nature, and they lead a totally different life from the ordinary human beings. So this is the next important aspect of the romantic world that William Shakespeare depicts in the world of his comedies. So this is the next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy. Next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy is not completely unrealistic. Shakespearean comedies are romantic in nature, no doubt. They are imaginary in nature. They are fantastic in nature, no doubt. But they are not at all completely purged of elements of realism, hints of realism, or glimpses of realism. For example, the settings in the comedies of William Shakespeare, they have glimpses of realism, hints of realism. Although the settings are imaginary in nature, unrealistic in nature, but they still have some sort of linkage with real life, some sort of relationship with life, because they have hints of realism in them. For example, take the example of Forest of Arden. In the Forest of Arden, there are at least two elements of realism, glimpses of realism, that relates this setting to real life. For example, one such hint of realism in this setting is roughness of weather, and second is chilliness of winter. The characters who live over there in the Forest of Arden, in the company of Duke, they face two problems over there like real human beings. First, they face roughness of weather. There is rainy weather, there is windy weather, and they have to face this type of a weather, this issue created, this problem created by the weather, and this sort of a weather is faced by the real human beings. So this is something realistic about this romantic setting. So there is a hint of realism. So it's a romantic setting, but it is not completely unrealistic. It is not completely romantic in nature, fantastic in nature, imaginary in nature. It has some sort of relationship with real life. And second important realistic touch in this setting is chilliness of winter. Those people who live over there in the Forest of Arden, characters who live over there in the Forest of Arden, in the company of Duke, they face chilliness of winter, they face coldness of winter, they face extreme cold weather over there. And this is also the problem faced by the real human beings, especially the poorer classes of the society. Poorer classes of the society, they do not have warm clothes to wear proper clothes to protect themselves from cold weather. They do not have well-built homes to protect themselves from cold weather. So these are the problems faced by the real human beings. So it means that everything in Shakespearean comedy is not completely, totally, absolutely unrealistic. They have hints of realism. So this is the example of romantic settings having realistic features in them. Second is characterization. Characterization is romantic. Characters, all the characters in Shakespearean comedies are unrealistic, but still they do have some sort of hints of realism that bring them closer to real human beings. For example, there are two characters in the comedy As You Like It. One is Duke and the other is Frederick. Both are brothers, right? Frederick commits many injustices against his own very brother, exiles his own brother Duke from his own territory, from his own country, and Duke has to take refuge in the forest of Arden with the accompaniment of, in the company of certain disciples, certain followers, right? So there are many Frederick-like cruel brothers, cruel human beings who commit many injustices against their near and dear ones. So both the characters are romantic in nature. Frederick and Duke's characters are romantic in nature, but still they have some sort of realism or realistic touch about them, which brings them closer to real human beings. So this is another important aspect of Shakespearean comedy, that is that Shakespearean settings are romantic in nature, but not completely romantic in nature. They do have hints of realism in them. They are not completely unrealistic. So this is the next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy. Next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy is theme. Theme in every Shakespearean comedy is love. And what could be more romantic than the theme of love? Every Shakespearean comedy depicts theme of love, right? So the theme of love or love is the most romantic emotion of human heart, and William Shakespeare depicts it in the world of his comedies. It's the main theme. It's the soul of William Shakespeare's comedies. It's the breadth of Shakespearean comedies. It's the nucleus of Shakespearean comedy. Everything rotates around this theme of love. Now, there are various aspects to this theme of love in the comedies of William Shakespeare. Number one aspect is that William Shakespeare treats this theme of love in a conventional manner. How he treats it in a conventional manner? Normally it happens that in a conventional love theme, lovers are united in the beginning, then they face certain problems in their life, and because of those problems, they are separated from one another, and in the climax, they are poles apart, and there are no hopes, there are no chances that they would be united together. Then in the climax, certain things happen in favor of hero and heroine, and all their differences and all their issues and problems, they disappear and they come closer to each other, and by the end they come closest to each other and they are united in a marriage bond. Drums and pipes are brought together and they are married to each other. This is a conventional pattern. This is the conventional path of a theme of love on which it travels. This is the conventional love story. This is how William Shakespeare depicts his theme of love in the world of his comedies, right? So this is first important aspect of the theme of love depicted by William Shakespeare in the world of his comedies, that is traditional treatment of love. Next important aspect of theme of love in Shakespearean comedy is that William Shakespeare depicts the theme of love in different forms and shapes, right? In different forms. Love has many shades. It has endless shades. It is the most written upon emotion of human heart. And there are a variety of aspects of the theme of love. And William Shakespeare portrays this theme of love from variety of angles. There are different types of loves portrayed by William Shakespeare in the world of his comedies. For example, he portrays the love that exists between two lovers. He portrays love that exists between two friends, men as friends. Then he portrays love between two girls as Sahelis. He portrays love between master and slave. So these are the different forms of love, at least 4 distinct forms of love in which William Shakespeare portrays it in the world of his comedies. Next important aspect of the theme of love in every Shakespearean comedy is that the theme of love that is portrayed or depicted by William Shakespeare in the world of his comedies is natural one, right? His theme of love is natural one. It is minus of any vulgarity and it is minus of the idealism. Neither there is platonic element in his theme of love, nor there is vulgar element in his theme of love. It is natural love, right? So this is the last but not the least aspect of theme of love portrayed by William Shakespeare in the world of his comedies. So this is the next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy, that is theme of love. Next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy is female characters. It is said that Shakespearean comedies are about females and tragedies are about males. Comedies are about heroines and tragedies are about heroes. One of the critics, his name is Gordon, he said that discussion about Shakespearean comedy is actually the discussion about its female characters or its heroines, because heroes in Shakespearean comedies, they slip into background, they take the back seat, and heroines are in the front seat, in the driving seat. They are always in the limelight. Whereas on the other hand, in the tragedies, heroes are in the limelight, heroines are in the background. Heroes take the driving seat and heroines are on the back seat. So this is the major difference between the tragedies and comedies of William Shakespeare. So females or female characters that dominate Shakespearean comedies as compared to the male characters. And in the world of his comedies, William Shakespeare portrays different types of females, rank-wise and age-wise, right? Right from the queen down to the kitchen maid, he portrays different types of female characters, age-wise and rank-wise. And age-wise, he also portrays different types of female characters, right from the 50 years old female down to the 15 years old girl. Every type of a girl is depicted by William Shakespeare in the world of his comedies age-wise. So it shows that William Shakespeare has a deep knowledge about female psychology. He knew the psychology of a queen. He also knew about the psychology of a dairy maid, a kitchen maid. He knew about the psychology of a 15 years old female and a 50 years old female. So this is the speciality of William Shakespeare's comedies, that they depict variety of female characters. There are unforgettable female characters in the world of his comedies. For example, there is the character of Rosalind, there is the character of Beatrice, there is the character of Audrey, there is the character of Celia. All these are the unforgettable female characters created by William Shakespeare in the world of his comedies. So this is the next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy, that is female characters. Last but not the least aspect of Shakespearean comedy is humor. Humor is the next important aspect of Shakespearean comedy, right? When you take the name of comedy, it brings in your mind the idea of humor, because comedy cannot be comedy without humor. So William Shakespeare also creates humor in the world of his comedy, right? His humor has certain characteristics, has certain features. First important aspect of his humor is that it is gentle one and it is soft one, minus of any sort of harshness and hardness. William Shakespeare's humor is very soft one, very gentle one. He never gets harsh in the use of his humor in the world of his comedies, right? He never gets bitter in the creation of his humor. So which is why it is said that William Shakespeare cuts jokes, but he never cuts human heart in the world of his comedies. So this is the next important aspect of, or one of the important aspects of the humor that is found in Shakespearean comedy. Next important aspect of his humor is that it is free from any kind of morality. William Shakespeare never creates humor in order to preach any kind of morality. There is no hidden message political message, social message, or moral message, or religious message behind his humor. His humor is pure humor, right? His humor is pure humor. It is for the sake of entertainment, it is for the sake of fun, it is for the sake of enjoyment, and nothing more than that, right? So William Shakespeare's humor is always a pure humor, minus of any kind of morality. So this is it for today. This is the last but not the least aspect of Shakespearean comedy, which is humor. And I hope you understood all the points that I told you about William Shakespeare's comedies, right? And thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.